Committee members, welcome again this morning. Welcome Madame Gladue, who is joining us this morning for today's meeting. The clerk has advised me that all the virtual witnesses have been sound tested and they have been approved. So with that, and we do have a quorum, I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 124 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Human Resources, Skills, Social Development, and the Status of Persons with Disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House of Commons rules. No translation?
No.
Good. Madame Chabot? No? Madame Chabot? No?
I'll translate.
Oh, I don't think it's meet the criteria. The translators are giving me the thumbs up. So, are you getting it now? Check her mic. Madame Chabot, c'est bon? Yeah, be careful on the button that you press. So, yeah. I agree. Anyhow, yes, I've been given a quick crash course, members, on how to use the mics. But if you do press. Is it off again?
Mesdames les interprètes,
c'est
peut-être un problème, mais moi,
we'll spend for a moment while this is clarified. Just give me a moment. you, committee members. We've got the translation worked out. Correct, Madame Shabat? Good. Okay, as I was indicating, today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format according to House of Commons procedures, meaning witnesses and members are appearing virtually. Today, all the members are in the room, so we have witnesses that are appearing virtually. Please, a couple of rules. You can choose to speak in the official language of your choice. In the room, interpretation services are available, as we've just seen through the mics. As well, if you're appearing virtually, please click on the globe icon on the bottom of your surface. Choose the official language of your choice. If there is an interruption in translation, please get my attention by raising your hand in the room or using the raised hand icon. For those virtually, we'll suspend while it is being corrected. I would remind all members to wait until I recognize you. Before speaking. To get my attention, simply raise your hand or use the raised hand icon. I also want to remind members, all your devices, please turn any alarms off that could go off routinely. There was an incident at our last meeting. And this is for the protection of the translators. As well as please refrain from tapping on the microphone boom because it does cause sound issues with the interpreters, and we do not want to do that. I want to, before we go to the witnesses, I want to clarify at the end, the conclusion of Tuesday's meeting, Madame Zarrillo had moved a motion to the committee. And the meeting adjourned before there was a clear direction on that particular motion. I want to advise members that Madame Zarrillo, the motion that she moved, there is a procedure for that, given that the motion that was introduced without 48-hour notice was on the subject matter that the committee was studying, but the precedent on that is that it must be rather general. My interpretation was that the study was in unionized wages in general, in a broad category versus non-unionized. The motion addressed a change to a specific item. Therefore, I would rule it as it was non-admissible. At that time. Given that the motion has now been on for 48 hours, so Madame Zarrillo would have the ability to move as it choose. Why I'm raising that, I just want to advise members, I will continue with that precedent decision on motions that may be introduced without 48 hours on a related study, given the fact that it doesn't kill the motion. It's simply, I'm asking, the 48-hour rule is the one that's been accepted and used, and that's the one that will take priority. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, February 26th, 2024, the committee resumes its study of compensation disparities between union and non-unionized workers in Canada. I would like to now welcome for witnesses for this hour. We have Tristan Waibu, Executive Vice President by video conference. From the British Columbia General Employees Union. We have from the Canadian Labour Congress, B. Brusk, President by video conference. We have D.T. Cochran, Senior Economist by video conference. From the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, District 140. Dan Jensen, who is with us in the room, General Chairperson. And UAA Local 663, Scott Archer, Business Agent. We'll begin with Ms. Brusk. You have up to 5 minutes. Please, you have the floor, Ms. Brusk.
Thank you so much. Greetings and good morning, Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Bea Brusk, and I am the President of the Canadian Labour Congress. The CLC is the country's largest central labour body, bringing together more than 50 national and international unions. We represent more than 3 million working people in Canada. The CLC will be providing a detailed written submission in the days ahead, but for the moment, here are my comments. I've been a trade unionist my entire adult life, and I know from direct experience that unionized workers enjoy more rights, higher wages, and better benefits. But the goal of unions is the advancement for all workers through a strong labor movement and through high union density. By forming unions and bargaining collectively, unions reduce the power imbalance in the workplace and in the broader economy. On their own, most workers are at a huge power disadvantage with their employer. But when they join together, workers can build solidarity and collective power. And that's the basis from which to negotiate with powerful corporations and employers. By organizing, unions promote inclusion, equality, and security, which reduces division, resentment, and political instability. Unions are crucial for advancing rights for women, for workers of color, people living with disabilities, gig workers, migrant workers, and other historically disadvantaged workers who have been excluded from accessing these rights. Workers gain effective access to important legal rights through their union and their collective agreement, and that includes protection against discrimination in employment, promotion and layoff, and the right to grieve management's arbitrary decisions. Make no mistake, formal statutory rights for workers, like things like employment standards laws, are vitally important. But too often they are weak, they're inaccessible, and they're slow to adapt to changing work environments. Without unions, employers are free to pocket 100% of the gains from productivity or to distribute them solely to shareholders. Unions demand that employers share a portion of productivity gains with workers, and they insist firms redistribute portions of economic rents. Unions also compress wages within firms, bringing up wages at the bottom faster than compensation for top earners and thereby reducing inequality. Unions also make work sites safer. A study from the Institute of Work and Health shows that unionized companies in Ontario's construction sector have significantly lower injury rates. Unions help close wage and employment security gaps for the most precarious workers. For example, 1 in 5 early career workers are in temporary positions. But among these young temporary workers, those in a union earn 31% more per hour than their non-unionized counterparts. Racialized workers face more challenges in the labor market. However, researchers with the Canadian Centre for Future Work found that the incomes of racialized workers in a union are more than $3,200 higher per year. Regardless of whether they're employed in the private sector or the public sector, unionized workers are much more likely to have disability insurance, extended health coverage, maternity and parental leave top-ups, and other benefits. And Statistics Canada recently found that 4 in 5 unionized workers have access to a workplace pension, while just 36% of non-unionized workers do. Unions lift wages and conditions for unionized employers, but also for non-unionized workers, and they do so through the union threat effect. Non-union employers commonly match the terms and conditions negotiated in unionized plants in a bid to fend off organizing drives and to stay non-union. And non-union employers match unionized employers to reduce recruitment and retention pressures that come from inferior wages and conditions. Unions also work to generalize gains won through collective bargaining to the broader workforce. Paid sick leave and paid leave time for victims of domestic violence are recent very good examples. Before being enshrined in legislation, these protections were already negotiated in many collective agreements. Unions demand paid sick leave, paid domestic violence, and affordable, high-quality childcare for all workers in every province and territory, and we are still fighting that fight. We know that unions don't just benefit members. The wages and benefits that unions negotiate strengthen local economies and fund high-quality public services. Unions are the leading providers of skills training and vocational education in Canada as well. Internationally, countries with strong labor movements have greater wage equality and stronger social programs and public services. And in Canada, more workers than ever want to access unions. We all need governments to remove barriers to standing in the way of workers who want to access being part of a union. After all, the freedom to form unions and engage in collective bargaining is a charter right in Canada and is protected under a national law. So thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Brusk. Mr. Jensen for 5 minutes or less.
I would like to thank this committee for the opportunity to share my experiences as an airport worker on the need for better protections for workers subject to the RFP, request for proposal, procurement process, referred to as contract flipping, and the need for living wages in aviation. My name is Dan Jansen, General Chairperson with the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers. The IAM represents 40,000 workers in Canada. Our airport members perform work at Air Canada, WestJet, Air Transat, Swissport, Menzies, and many other smaller service providers. I'm a 24-year Air Canada employee working below the wing. I got involved in my union after speaking up about safety issues at Toronto Pearson, and I quickly realized that reporting safety issues and addressing them in a workplace as large as Pearson was very empowering. I've been involved in the labor movement at Pearson for 13 years and was a former co-leader of the Toronto Airport Workers Council. And I co-founded the Toronto Pearson Worker Health and Safety Forum, a groundbreaking workplace-wide safety committee, and this safety model is being shared with other airports around the world by both the GTAA and the International Transport Workers Federation. I've received an ION Safety Award from the Airport Authority for improving safety culture and was involved with 15 in Fairness, which helped 1.5 million workers when the Ontario minimum wage jumped to $14 per hour. Aviation is a high union density sector, which has a positive effect on all workers. Although workers employed by many service providers only earn wages slightly above or at minimum wage. Unionized workers enjoy the protections and values of having a contract in place, and for non-union workers, wages may be comparable. However, some employers deduct the costs of benefits and parking, impacting their overall earnings. One of my senior stewards, Francis, has worked for 2 decades at Pearson providing wheelchair services to passengers. Because of contract flipping, he's had multiple employers and has had to start all over again each time the contract changed hands, except for the last time. That contract was awarded effective September the 1st, 2019, the same day successorship rights came into effect in the code. For the first time, Francis kept his 2015 seniority date and was able to make gains based on a portion of his previous experience. There is a contract flip happening at Pearson right now. The GTA has a tender out for baggage handling work performed by IAM members at TBH Services. This contract expires 28 days from today's date on October the 22nd, 2024, and there has been no confirmation about the successful bidder. Imagine not knowing if in 28 days you will be working with your current employer, a new employer, or if you will even have a job moving forward. TBH workers have expressed frustration with not knowing what will happen, and workers have literally broken down in my office due to the emotional toll that the situation is causing. The lack of a proper notice period is concerning and should be addressed by legislating that the RFP process provides no less than a 16-week requirement for notice of the successful bidder. This would align with the timelines of the group termination provisions of the code. MP Alexander Boulerice's private members bill, Bill C-330, would also be impactful. This would ensure workers maintain the same collective agreement and union despite whether the employer changes. These protections should be enacted quickly by supporting this bill and passing it during this current session of the House. For TBH workers whose bargaining agreement expires on October the 31st, Bill C-330 would provide peace of mind, knowing that their CBA is protected and their union will remain in place. The GTA released the Pearson Standard in April 2023. Section 220.02 states that the expectation employees have access to a safe working environment, earn a fair wage that allows them to afford shelter, food, and other necessities. Unfortunately, for many service contract workers earning low wages, they struggle to afford the necessities. The IAM is pushing for a living wage for all airport workers. A Change.org living wage petition started by an IAM representative has nearly 9,900 signatures, and I have an active House of Commons petition, E5050, calling for an airport living wage. It is my understanding that the GTAA is lobbying the Labour Program and Transport Canada for an airport minimum wage. Airport workers deserve fair wages. Their work is essential to the safe operation of Canada's aviation transportation sector. They deserve a better minimum standard. In conclusion, I am seeking help from my coworkers. Bill C-330 could pass in this session of the House. Legislation for an RFP notice period should align with the group termination provisions, and the minimum standard should be no less than living wages for all airport workers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. Mr. Archer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. I'm Scott Archer, business agent of UA Local 663 Pipefitters, Plumbers, and Welders Union in Sarnia, Ontario. I'm appearing today in place of my boss, friend, and mentor, Brother Cale McDonald, who is our business manager of Local 663 and is regrettably at present in the U.S. for a previous engagement and was unable to attend. I'm here to represent our nearly 1,700 local members and roughly 3,500 family members who depend upon them to provide a comfortable middle-class lifestyle. Additionally, we're part of the UA's Canadian membership, which is 53,000 strong, as well as its 370,000 members across North America. To start, I'd like to express our thanks for being invited to speak here today and for being afforded the opportunity to have our voices heard. First, I'd like to speak to the issue of wage disparity between union and non-workers in this province. Unions, as you know, have long been the champion of the underdog and the source of a higher quality of life for working-class families. This is not some new mysterious process. It's achieved the same way it has been since the 1800s, since the landmark Oshawa General Motors Union movement of 1937, which was in fact spurred by the Sarnia Homes Foundry labor movement 2 weeks prior to that. It's achieved through the strength of fair bargaining made possible by unions, with many individuals coming together to collectively forge a stronger bargaining position as a cohesive group, allowing the working man a more level playing field to negotiate things that society now takes for granted, such as a fair wage, safer working conditions, and a 40-hour work week. These advances in human rights would never have been possible for the individual worker were it not for their union brothers and sisters coming together to make it happen. Those stickers that you see on our hard hats are absolutely true. Unions, the people who brought you the weekend. What appears at first glance to be a fairly impressive wage package is in fact a considerably larger amount than what the union worker takes home at the end of each week. A sizable percentage of union wages actually go to support and protect our families in the form of weekly contributions to things like medical and dental benefits, carefully curated pension plans, and death benefits for our spouses and families. All things that we have worked hard to develop and nurture in the interest of keeping our loved ones safe, healthy, and financially secure during hard times. It's been proven time and time again that unions also serve a greater purpose to society in general by motivating non-union employers to provide safer, better working conditions, raising the prevailing wage as non-union employers strive to attract employees by providing a wage that's competitive with a union workforce, driving the non-union employers, to initiate contribution matching style retirement plans where the employer matches a percentage of the monies put into an RRSP by the worker. This is still a far cry from union pension plans, but an attempt by some employers to remain competitive in the labor market. So in reality, unions really have done the heavy lifting that has provided an enhanced quality of life for nearly everyone in our society through a trickle-down effect. If time allows today, there are a few other key issues impacting our workforce that I'd like to bring to the committee's attention as well. This past summer, UA Local 663 in Sarnia had nearly 300 members on our out-of-work list. These highly trained welders, steam fitters, plumbers, and apprentices were unable to procure employment while one of the most heavily government-subsidized projects in history employed temporary foreign workers just down the road at the Stellantis battery plant in Windsor. We encourage both the federal and provincial governments to continue supporting these types of projects that will ensure Canadian energy needs are met in the future. However, they must come with the requirement of Canadian workers building these projects. We would also encourage project labor agreements, or at the very least prevailing wage policies, to ensure these massive government investments equate to good paying jobs for Canadian families. I can't stress enough the importance of UTIP grants, the Union Training and Innovation Program, allowing us to improve and continue our union training programs that allow us to continue to supply the most highly trained workforce in Canada. Expanding these grants to include brick and mortar investment would also allow building trades unions to increase much needed training space and ensure the continued success of our training programs well into the future. When local unions are investing in the future of their members by building, renovating, or expanding their training centers, we often run into issue with financing these projects through private sector banks. The Government of Canada could also offer financing options for these projects, streamlining the construction process and putting more highly skilled workers on construction projects faster. My final concern to bring forward to you today is the need for government support for emissions reduction projects in the petrochemical industry. While we all want to combat climate change, we need to ensure the government not only supports new construction, but also emissions reduction projects in existing facilities. The petrochemical sites of Sarnia-Lambton can continue to secure the energy needs of Ontario and beyond. However, government support is needed to ensure the client owners of these sites invest in their assets in Ontario instead of closing them down, and that emissions reduction goals are set on a realistic and workable timeline with government support. In conclusion, I'd like to say that I owe everything that my family and I have to being a union member. Every family vacation we've ever taken, every memory of my children's smiles on Christmas morning, the ability to care for them in an adequate manner and provide them with a comfortable home in a safe neighborhood where they can grow and flourish and eventually raise children of their own. You can see us in February about that last one. My wife and I are very excited to be first-time grandparents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members, for your time today. I look forward to answering any questions or providing any insight that I can.
Thank you, Mr. Archer. Now to conclude, Ms. Waibu for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. I just want to take a moment to very quickly introduce myself, and I will translate right after. Tristan Diwayu, Timtianu, Kanhada Dipatagan, Adachain Diwawatku. My name's Tristan. I'm Timshian. My clan is the Raven, and I come from a small town up north here in BC called Prince Rupert. I was thinking about what to say here for quite a while, and all I ended up preparing was a couple of speaker notes. And the thing that sat in my notepad for the longest time was simply to remember who was really, truly a friend and was there when you needed it. That's been my experience as a union member. I started as a counselor in a BCGEU certified job when I was quite young. And at that time, while I was still being granted the patience and the grace to learn things as I was getting going, to be introduced as a new union member, to join my local executive, to eventually get involved with my labor council, during all of that in the background were many, many colleagues who I hadn't yet met that fought for things like a low-wage redress that significantly supported my own income at a time when I greatly needed it as I was going through things like medical transition and mental health concerns resulting from a long series of intergenerational trauma in my community and in my family and home. What I learned from much of that experience back then was that the union is where the people that look out for you are. It's the place where folks invite you to the barbecue. It's the place where people come and help you pack up when you decide that you need to move last minute and think that you can do it entirely by yourself. I enjoyed much of my experience then, learning that, well, as I was growing and adjusting, there were so many people fighting alongside me for the things that I needed to get through, that when I was young and new and fresh to start, that I did not know would be as important as I know them now. I later ended up moving down to the Lower Mainland where I live now, and I unionized my work site down here, a small nonprofit. Coming in, I had known at that point already that my livelihood is meant in a unionized work site. This is where I'll receive gainful employment, and as someone with disability, it's imperative to me that my job security is protected, that there are anti-discrimination policies in place, and that I have a say in the structure of the conditions around my work. We unionized to lock in much of the compensation that we already had. We want people from out of the gate, as soon as they come in, doing equal work, that they receive equal pay and benefits. We had wage parity that we wanted to address. We had means of wanting to make sure that our voice was properly heard when doing the work that impacted other communities that represented ourselves, when doing the work that we knew that we needed. But ultimately, truly what we came to together upon coming down here was realizing that the folks that you organize with are the people that extend beyond just a contract. Unionism is the collective bargaining regime. It is coming out of the law of contracts and coming into something where you have a little bit more equal say and power, but it's also about working to see your communities strive and smile and thrive. It's those whose labor upholds everything and yet they find themselves still at the mercy of their paycheck at the end of each couple of weeks. Worker power has the ability to secure equal pay for equal work. Worker power and solidarity has the strength to carry you forward when you need to fight for change so that you can do what matters in a way that's safe, that's accessible, that's informed, and keeps us up with the cost of what it truly takes to keep you going, whether that's spiritual, emotional, financial, physical. So I want to leave it there and keep it kind of short and sweet. I'm so grateful for the other witnesses on this panel saying so much of what I had percolating in my head, the way in which unions can stand against things like two-tiering, the way in which we can stand against and protect our fellow members from things like contract flipping. So many important things that have come to benefit all of us. Unionized or not, as a rising tide raises all ships alongside it. And what I ultimately would like to impart is knowing that as one big union all together, people as workers have the power to invoke change and make sure that all of us get home from work safely at the end of the day and keep one job as enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waibu, for your presentation. And just before we begin, there's only one time slot for questioning today. We'll go directly till 1 o'clock. So we'll follow the approved speaking order, beginning with Mr. Seaback for 6.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Archer, I wanted to start with a conversation with you. I'm the proud father of a union son whose life got immeasurably better when he started working for a company that was unionized. So I agree with everything that you say, how unions make working conditions better. You mentioned the Stellantis battery plant and some of the challenges that are happening with employment. What I look at is, yes, unions provide better wages, except when government policy ends up with unions losing jobs. And then there's no wage, so it's not actually a better wage, and policy has so much of an implication on that. One of the things I heard is that the lack of unions being at the table when those large government investments were negotiated for those plants has led to the conditions where there are, in fact, workers coming from other countries to perform the work that our skilled union members could do. I wonder if you could speak to that, about how you being at the table would have mattered, and if you've raised these concerns with the government.
Thank you. I believe it was more an issue of we were promised one thing and then something else materialized. There ended up being a lot of pipe showing up on site that we were told came from Korea, but the paint was still wet on it. A lot of shifty business going on with that employer. And it's quite frustrating that project was funded by such a massive amount of taxpayer dollars, and we kind of had the old switcheroo pulled on us, for lack of a better term.
And that's resulted in, obviously, lost work opportunities for members of your union and others, I suspect.
I would say so, certainly. We, as I said earlier, had roughly 300 members on our out of work list, and a lot of people were looking forward to that job, being kind of a bit of a financial savior for them, timing being what it was, and it did not really pan out or amount to that as it could have or should have.
So one other thing I've heard so much, I've been traveling and meeting with unions all across the country, is the need for apprentices and the need for funding for apprentices. Now, do you know, has there been any, like this is massive amounts of taxpayer dollars going to these plants. Was any of those taxpayer dollars tied to ensuring that there would be opportunities for apprentices at these plants? And if not, do you think that should be something the government should be doing?
I couldn't comment with much accuracy, to be honest with you, on the ratio of apprentices there. I know a few of our local contractors had quite a few apprentices on site at that, but the ratio of our local people to people from other jurisdictions
government, if they're putting that amount of money in, they should say that the company has to pay for a certain amount of apprentices to be on the job to get that training.
Oh, certainly. That we normally operate with a given ratio of apprentices to journeymen. So we try and stick to that because that's the whole root of the apprenticeship program is learning on the job. So it's important to be on a job in order to learn.
Dan, I want to quickly switch to you. Really interesting. Great to see you again and talk about the issue of contract flipping. One thing I do want to say, you talked about Mr. Boulouris's private members bill. Unfortunately, it's not actually before the House of Commons. It won't be tabled actually for second reading until sometime in the spring session. And he's got 7 other private members' bills that have been put forward. So we don't even know if this bill is going to be actually the one he moves forward with. So there's very little chance of it actually being passed in this Parliament. But one of the things on contract flipping that I looked at is that Section 47.3 of the Labour Code actually eliminated contract flipping for those in the security aspect of being at the airport. And it actually says in there that the Minister of Labour, on a recommendation to the Governor and Council, can add other areas to that. So the government could have done this 7 years ago. In fact, the NDP government, they were part of that, could have required it to be done simply by OIC. Do you think that would be a great way to just get it done?
Order, Madame Zurillo.
Yeah, I would like the member to correct the inaccurate misinformation about who is the government. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The members heard Madame Zurillo's comments. I'll have to allow him to deal with that. It's not.
Well, you know,
excuse me, Mr. Seebeck. It's not. It's not a point of order that I can.
A point of order. It's misinformation, Mr. Chair, and you should correct the record. It's debate.
Well, correct. Thank you, Madam Zurillo. Mr. Seebeck, please use correct terminology in your questioning.
Well, as part of their supply and confidence agreement, they could have told the government they need to fix this, and they chose not to do that, and so it didn't get fixed. Do you think that would be a great way to solve the issue rather than, because the government, like, for a private member's bill to go through, it takes a long time. The government could actually tomorrow fix it. Would you recommend that the government fix it tomorrow by having the minister make a regulation by Governor and Council?
Time is up. So
I've got 30 seconds. The interruption didn't count.
Yes, I think that the government should be working to fix the issue of contract flipping. It is unfortunate to hear about Bill C-330. That would go a long way to helping groups like TBH Services. I will say that 47.3 was something that our union advocated strongly for our CATS security members, and the language there has been used to help many other airport workers through contract retendering to provide them with equal remuneration and successorship rights as part of also Section 189.
Mr. Jensen, thank you. Mr. Seebeck, Mr. Long for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to my colleagues, and thank you to the witnesses for coming in today. I remember coming home in 1988. I got my first job at Canada Packers, and my salary at that point was $20,000. And I remember coming in the door and talking to my dad and telling him I made $20,000, and he had this blank look on his face. You're making $20,000? Yeah. So I was kind of like, well, Dad, you've worked at a, as I learned, a non-unionized place for 40 years. What do you make? And Dad at that point was making $15,000. And, I kind of dug into that at that point, and I realized very quickly that, although he had a steady job, he had no benefits, he had 2 weeks vacation after 40 years, he had no health plan, no pension plan, nothing. And, I quickly realized and did some comparison of other plants where he could have worked, and he could have made a lot more. So, again, this study, we're doing this study, and I'll read, Workers receive more powerful paychecks, the impact of unionization on benefits and pensions, and the reasons behind such disparities. That's what this study is about. We're here to study why unionization, companies that have unions, pay better and do better. And we always say that, union wages kind of set wages for the middle class. So, Mr. Archer, my question to you is, and I also want to say, I want to thank your comments on the Union Training Innovation Program. We've had some wonderful announcements in my riding at St. John Rothsay on UTIP with Heat and Frost and IBEW and others. It's a wonderful program. But I do want to get your thoughts and comments. There was a Stats Canada Labour Force survey in 2023 that came out and confirmed unionized workers made an average of $35.73 per hour in 2023 compared to $32.60 for workers who weren't unionized. So, it's a big difference. It's a difference of $3.13. So I guess you're probably not surprised by that, but does that align with your experience and what you've seen?
Yes, I'm not surprised in the least by that. Depending whose stats you believe, some are slightly slanted one direction or the other, but just a quick Google of it last night brought me to between 11% gap in the wages to close to 40%, according to some people's stats. I think that's pretty accurate. And our workforce is definitely worth every penny of it due to as others have mentioned, the higher level of training. If you look at our area in southwestern Ontario, we've got the best TRIR rating of anywhere in the universe, to my knowledge, as far as workers not being injured and having a safety record that's absolutely impeccable. That's all part of it as well.
Thank you. To witness Waibu, I want to see if you have some comments on that. Is that your experience too, what you've seen with respect to wage differences between unionized and non-unionized workers?
Oh yeah, definitely. And throughout my own career, I've worked mostly in the community and social services, and I've worked both at unionized and non-unionized work sites. And a really big thing that does make it imperative for me to be at a unionized work site are some of these differences, not only in wages, but also in things like benefits compensation. That's especially important to me as someone who's at quite high risk of psychological injury doing the type of work that I do, as well as just physical injury from my own chronic pain-related disabilities. So really, really big differences that I've noticed within the nonprofit and community services sector between areas that are unionized and aren't unionized. And the work site that I'm at now, I'm happy to say that we actually started off pretty okay. As was mentioned, we had a work site that was wanting to keep up with unionized wages and compensation. Locking that in and getting to bargain higher really helped us quite a lot during that period of inflation throughout 2021, 2022. It really made a big difference.
Thank you for that. Going door to door in 2015, there wasn't a union. I mean, St. John Rothsay is a very unionized city, blue-collar town. There wasn't a unionist household that I went to that didn't talk about 525 and 377, and obviously I had to quickly learn what 525 and 377 was. And, obviously, call a spade a spade. They were union-busting bills, redundant, unreasonable reporting, difficulty forming, joining unions. And obviously there was a call for our government to reverse 377 and 525, which we did. And I'm very proud of that. So my question to you, Ms. Brusk, is can you just give us some comments and thoughts about 377 and 525 and how detrimental that was to unions in Canada? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Both of those bills were egregious attacks on labor, quite frankly. C525 making it much more difficult for workers in the federally regulated sector to actually organize and form a union. As all of us have heard already, the pathway to the middle class is having a union card in your back pocket and making it harder for employees to actually sign that union card and to be certified to bargain collectively with their employer. That bill stood in the way of that. Bill C-377, of course, was the requirement of unions to do extensive reporting on absolutely every time they buy new computers for their office, every time they have to actually reimburse a worker based on a health and welfare trust fund claim that worker might have.
Thank you. We've gone over in time. You can follow that thought in another answer, please. Madame Chabot, pour 6 minutes, please.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you to all our witnesses. And also want to thank those who preceded them last week during the study. So there is no translation. Can people hear the interpretation? So before going to politics, I was a union leader for more than 30 years. And when we initiated the study, I questioned myself because what you're telling us today, well, other witnesses told us, I think that it's quite documented, and no one questions the advantages of unionization except for people on the right who are wondering what's the purpose of unions. So what you have said and what others said seemed obvious, but if it was necessary to have a study to show these things that are self-evident, that's a good thing. Mr. Jansen, when I started as an MP for the Bloc Québécois, we were called to mobilize ourselves for maintenance employees at the Montreal airport. So it was about this contract flipping situation, which was completely unacceptable because these are disguised layoffs. So you are paying people for $10 to $20 less, and the requirements of the collective agreements are not met. So the current government was very aware of this. Do you find this practice as being an obstacle to the freedom of association and to unionization?
Question, Ms. Chabot. It can be an obstacle, yes. I believe there's always an opportunity for an airport authority to flip a contract and have it go to a non-union employer. And at the end of the day, the rights and the rights that those unionized members had under the collective agreement would no longer be there, which would mean that the new employer would be able to change the terms and conditions of employment following the contract flip. Previously, before the equal remuneration rates came into effect, it was considered a race to the bottom, where employees may have made gains over 5-10 years. Once the contract was flipped, they had to start all over again. Thankfully, we've come a long way, but there is still more work to do, and I believe that, again, maintaining the collective agreement and the rights of the union would successfully protect members that are subject to contract flipping.
Je vous salue pour votre lutte sur cette question.
Thank you for your fight on this issue. So I think that made a big difference in one sector. In the aerospace and aviation sector, we know that it's not always a government priority. So the conditions of work depend on the importance of a sector for our economy, and that one is very important. So you're really fighting a double battle. Congratulations. Ms. Brusque, the CLSC has several unions under its umbrella in Canada and Quebec. So you are a collection of large unions. You talked about all the advantages, but you also talked about obstacles to unionization. We can see the rate of unionization in Canada. In the public sector, it's strongly unionized, but we can see a decrease in the private sector. And one of the major roles of unions is to give a voice to those who don't have a voice. So what are the obstacles to unionization in the sector? So I'd like you to talk.
Important question.
Pour cette question importante, Madame. Effectivement, il est très difficile pour les employés de prendre, les travailleurs, de prendre des décisions. Effectivement, il peut y avoir des craintes en cours de processus.
J'ai pas de traduction.
Yes.
Est-ce que Monsieur le Président, Madame Bruce peut reprendre sa réponse? Il n'y avait pas de traduction du tout.
Could Ms. Brusk repeat what she said because there was no translation?
Unionizing is very difficult for workers. It is fraught with anxiety and fear about what the process will do and the disharmony that it may cause when employer interference is part of that equation. And unfortunately, we've seen many regressive governments across the country, provincial and territorial governments, change how workers can unionize, requiring more than a simple signing of union cards, but also requiring an additional step by having a follow-up vote. When we elect politicians, we ask for people's voice in that once. When we choose to become unionized, it's often a two-step process across this country, where workers have to make the decision to firstly sign a union card and then after a certain period of time have to go and vote. And that gives the employer many opportunities to run interference and to provide all kinds of inappropriate context and feedback to those workers, creating a lot of fear and division within that workplace while this process is underway. And that is what we see time and time again. So what it's going to take to get more workers unionized is good legislative action, requiring simply the signature of a union card and having a majority of those workers choose to actually gain a bargaining opportunity with their employer.
Madame Chabot, and I had stopped the clock while it was corrected. So, Madame Zerillo, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask my first question to witness Tyler Weibo. You introduced the reality about persons with disabilities and how they experience unionized versus non-unionized work environments. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind to just share what benefits led you to adopt the stance, which I see you've openly stated you would not work in a non-union environment after now working in one. Yeah, can you just share why you adopted this stance in the frame of a person with disabilities?
Yeah, definitely. And thank you for the question, because I believe that this is a really important one. Rates of disability in Canada are fairly high, and barriers to employment are even higher. A big reason behind me really needing to have a unionized worksite is multifactorial. Some of it is the securing and say in benefits packages, the pieces of compensation that do support the additional costs that I have in my life due to my health care and the wear and tear that my body and brain takes from my work. But some of it is also that we live in a reality in a society that has a lot of ableism and a lot of misconceptions about people with disability that can create further barriers in my work. And what is really helpful sometimes is being able to have not only my other members there to stand alongside me, but the access to really good servicing representatives that are able to come in when I need it, process grievances, finances, join me in joint labor management, help me in health and safety. These are all sorts of committees that I've sat on myself, but it's also given us the opportunity to bring in ADRs, alternative dispute resolutions, for both Indigenous and non-Indigenous employees, so that people have multiple ways of resolving issues as they come up, of advocating for their accessibility needs in the work environment. And these are just not things that I have found doable within non-unionized environments. And actually, much of the time when I've engaged in a version of my own joint labor management in non-unionized work sites, what I've found is that we may as well put a union in there and make sure that our protections are actually much more legalistically sound.
Thank you so much for that. An important testimony as we think about the government looking at employment opportunities, as you said, in this ableist society that we live in. I want to thank every witness today who's really shared their personal experiences and stories. So important to understand that we're talking about people and how safe work environments affect their daily life. My next question is for Dan Jansen, witness Dan Jansen. You mentioned we've had a lot of discussion in the last two meetings around contract flipping. We know that there's issues around contract flipping. You introduced today the RFP process, and I'm just looking at an article around that you had said that the RFP documents right now, what's happening in the Pearson Airport, that there was no language about labor standards or Canadian labor rights and protections. Can you just expand on what changes need to be made federally on the RFP process in federally regulated industries and work sites?
Thank you for the question, Ms. Cirillo. Yes, I believe we could look to the Building Services Act in the province of Ontario. There was a contract flip that happened with the baggage cart handling team. These workers fell under the Building Services Act, and within the RFP, or the request for proposal procurement process, the laws were all laid out, including the seniority list, the names of employees, so that the new contractor would have or would fully understand their expectations under the Ontario law. I believe if we went in that direction, workers would be much better protected, and they'd feel comfortable knowing that no matter what happened with the contract retendering process, that they would be protected and have their jobs following the contract flip.
So I think about, thank you so much for that, and I think about the 28 days. The employees right now at Pearson are under stress and pressure right now, having no real visibility into what their work is going to look like in the next 28 days. Can you just explain to this committee how having a more transparent RFP process, or a process as you just outlined, would help employees like those that are waiting these next 28 days with bated breath?
Sure. Yeah, I've done a lot of work at Pearson and discussing improvements to our overall safety culture. I can tell you when workers are stressed out, when they have anxiety, when they don't know their future, it's going to have an impact on the safety culture because their mind is not at task. Having a longer procurement process would allow workers to fully understand what's going to happen with their jobs. I believe that aligning it with the group termination provisions of the code of 16 weeks notice would go a long way to ensuring that workers understood who their new employer may be, as well as that new employer having a long time to get to know those workers prior to the contract changing hands officially and the new employer taking place with that working group.
Great, and I would just ask witness Bree Brusk if they would also like to make some comments about the RFP and potentially some transparency and notice on RFPs in federally regulated workspaces.
We 100% support what my colleague Dan has already submitted. We think that transparency is critically important. Employees deserve to know what their work life is going to look like. Employees deserve to have their protections continue, and the processes should be clear that that those protections need to continue going into the future, regardless of who the successful new company is coming in.
Madame Cirillo, Ms. Bruce, we'll now go to Ms. Falk for 5 minutes.
Chair. Okay, there we go. It's on. I just, in response to MP Long's misleading remarks, the Conservative leader has been very clear and publicly on the record that a Conservative government will not allow nor permit to be passed bills like 377 and 5225. So I just want to make sure that that's on the record, because I think it's been mentioned more than once in this committee, what is actually on public record, and there's been attempts to mislead that. I come from a union household. My father works in the energy sector. I'm from Saskatchewan, so in Western Canada. So I am very familiar with just not only the benefits that being a part of a union does for an individual family, but what it does for community, including in younger kids. I know my dad's local union for many years was giving scholarships to kids going into the trades or whatnot. So I think that's a very important aspect also to highlight. Mr. Archer, I just want to congratulate you as well as becoming a grandparent for the first time. I hear it's more fun. I'm not there yet, but I hear it's more fun. So congratulations. And I do want to focus on some of your comments just that you had in your opening regarding the Stellantis battery plant in Windsor. So the Prime Minister's offer of $44 billion in taxpayer money to a massively profitable corporation didn't even come with a promise for jobs for Canadian workers, or that it would create those jobs. And in my opinion, it's a slap in the face, not only to Canadian taxpayers, but to Canadian workers, because I believe that we have the skill and the talent to build Canada, to build the things that Canadians want and that Canadians need. So when the news of the 900 foreign workers was breaking, we heard excuses from the government that these replacement workers were needed as they were contributing a specialized skill set that was needed. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, does UA Local 663 members and also our Canadian labour force have the skills and the specialized knowledge that would fill these roles and that could fill these roles?
Ms. Falk, I'd like to first thank you for your congratulations. We absolutely have the skilled workers to fill those positions. As I said, my local union specifically had 300 people roughly on the out-of-work list, and we are known North America-wide for our welders and for their skill level. Some of those people at the Stellantis plant that have been claimed to be specialized workers. I've got some photographs on my phone of some of the welds that they did. That I've got an 8-year-old that has been helping me restore an old truck, and his welding skills are far surpassing anything that they did. Some of that was an absolute disgrace, and I know it set the project back, and our skilled unionized workers have spent a lot of hours cutting out those garbage welds and replacing them with welds that meet the standard of the TSSA.
So not efficient then, if we're having to redo the work that's been done.
That's correct. Grossly inefficient to have us come back and repair the stuff that was substandard.
Did the government's failure to ensure that the taxpayer-funded jobs were given to Canadians undermine unions?
I don't think things ended up going the direction they were supposed to, that's for sure. As far as, I don't really want to jump to one side or the other politically here, but that job did not go the direction that it was supposed to, and we're all pretty disappointed with the outcome.
So what would you say the direct impact on Canadian work? What is the direct impact on Canadian workers when jobs are, like yours, specialized, skilled, are displaced by foreign workers? Like, what is the direct impact on your fellow employees, your brotherhood for it?
Right. Well, we've got a lot of members that were unable to, due to a shortage of work, make minimum requirements for hours worked for EI, things like that. So people are concerned about car payments, mortgage payments. It's really impacting people at the family level and their financial security when things like that happen.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Coteau for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity. And I want to thank all of our witnesses today. It's been a really good conversation. And in fact, the witnesses on the previous occasion were also very valuable. So thank you for being here and speaking on behalf of Canadians, on behalf of organized labor. I'm a big supporter of unions. When I first got to the Toronto District School Board in 2003, we were trying to fix a lot of the damage that common sense conservatives did in Ontario to the education system. The last time common sense conservatives had power in the province, there was a complete dismantling of public education to such a degree where we saw more than half of the school days were gone because of that labor disruption. We've had members here talk about the leader of the Conservatives' track record on the relationship with organized labor. The fact is that, when 377 and 525 were brought into the House of Commons by the Conservatives, the leader of the Conservatives voted in favor of those bills. So it's not what he's going to do now. We just need to look at the track record of Conservatives to really understand, what may happen in the future. But here we are today, and the reason we're studying this specific topic is to let parliamentarians know and to let Canadians know that and I think one witness said good legislative action. When we put in good legislation to support unions, it allows us to build a better workforce, increase productivity, but most importantly, it allows for families, for workers to be able to be protected, to have better paying jobs. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank unions for, weekends, for holidays, for, workplace rules that prevent, certain types of injuries, child labor laws. There are so many elements, pensions, that come from organized labor, and I just want to say thank you, and I want to be on the record saying thank you for the work that the folks do every day to preserve unions. So my big question is, now maybe I'll go to you, Mr. Archer, what can we do to build on good legislative action in the House of Commons as parliamentarians to better support unions, to make sure at the end of the day that we get the legislation right from all parties to make sure that we can continue, especially as the economy is changing. We're seeing less unionized jobs in certain sectors and a decline in unionized jobs. What can we do to strengthen unions in Canada?
Thank you, and you're welcome.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, for something like that Stellantis job, having agreements in writing that Canadian unionized workers are absolutely to be employed on jobs like that going forward is essential. Possibly with a PLA, things like that are essential, because it was seems like a bit of a bait and switch on that job, to be honest with you.
An example where you saw it happen in good, because Conservatives didn't even agree with that type of investment in Ontario. There was a lot of rhetoric in the House of Commons that said that we shouldn't be using tax dollars to invest in projects like that. But as the economy changes, we are making more investments into the economy, to the new economy, and it's important that we get it right. Have you seen an example in Canada where that type of investment has gone in a positive way to support workers overall? Do you have an example?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to get drawn into a discussion on whose sign is going to be in my front yard come election time.
Oh, you don't have to. We just want to get good advice from you. That's all. We'll deal with the politics on our side.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of work done countrywide that has employed union folks, but I think that Stellantis one sticks with us the most because it's most recent and it stings a little bit, right?
Yeah.
As far as other projects, like I think with with the battery plant coming up in St. Thomas, now is the time to get out ahead of it and make sure that that things are correctly in place to ensure that Canadian unionized labor is used on something like that, because that project, if I recall correctly, is physically covering about 5 times the real estate that the Windsor one is, and the Windsor one is absolutely massive.
Well, thank you again. Appreciate the answer.
Madame Chabot. Madame Chabot, pour 2 minutes et 30.
For 2.5 minutes. Yes. Thank you. I will take advantage of my 2.5 minutes to present the motion that I have filed in good fight in the 48 within 48 hours, which concerns workers, but under another angle. It's the one that I filed stating that we undertake a study on the situation of workers in the seasonal industries in terms of the poor employment insurance regime for these workers who are often dealing with job insecurity and have financial difficulties. At least 3 meetings, including 2 to hear witnesses. And I will say that these workers, these seasonal workers that are in our rural regions, often have to deal with having no income and no jobs. So that we could undertake a study to examine that situation with the employment insurance regime. I'm asking for your support. Thank you.
The motion is in order. It has been given proper notice. Discussion on the motion of Madame Chabot.
Chair, I want to keep listening to witness testimony. I don't doubt the sincerity of our colleague, and I know that's an important issue for her, but it's a matter that could be taken up in committee business as well. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'll move to adjourn debate.
On the motion?
On the motion.
So we have a motion. We have a motion to adjourn a debate on the motion of Madame Chabot. So I have to go to a vote on that. A recorded vote, clerk, on the motion to adjourn. Yeah. It's a motion was made to adjourn debate on the motion. Recorded vote, clerk.
On the motion to adjourn debate, Mr. Fragiscatos.
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. Coteau.
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Yes.
Ms. Gray. Ms. Falk.
Yes.
Mr. Seaback.
Yes.
Ms. Gladue.
Yes.
Madame Chabot.
No.
No.
The motion to adjourn has been upheld. It returns it to testimony from witnesses, and your time is up, Madame Chabot. Madame Zarillo for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And you know, it's disappointing to see the Liberals and the Conservatives continuing to team up to shut down really important conversations around workers in this country. I want to thank all of the. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I thank you so much to all of the witnesses today, and I want to just appreciate all of you for the outstanding work that you do. And I, too, wanted to follow up on a motion that I brought at the last committee when we heard about the detrimental impact of contract flipping on workers. And as I said last time, we must, as parliamentarians, do what we can to protect workers from this contract flipping, and we heard about it again today. So I will, there's notice been given, I will put onto the floor again that in the opinion of the committee, that the Canadian Labour Code be amended to close a loophole that annuls existing labour contracts or collective agreements when there is a change of employer for subcontractors working at Canadian airports by implementing amendments outlined in NDP PMB C330 titled An Act to Amend the Canada Labour Code, Successor Rights and Obligations, Airports, and that the committee report this to the House.
Thank you, Madame Zarillo, and you are correct. The motion has received a proper notice for it to be moved. So now we'll move to discussion on the motion.
Thank you. I still have the
of
floor.
Madame
Thank you,
Zarrillo.
Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to thank Madame Chabot for 2 meetings in a row. Madame Chabot has put forward and made excellent comments about airport workers. I thank the Bloc for the work that they've been doing there. And I also want to thank my Conservative colleague, talking about the fact that there are opportunities to have action. I brought with me today, too, the 47.2. It's not enough. We need to have this in legislation, so I hope that all of my colleagues will support this motion, and for us to really start looking out for workers in this country where there's loopholes in the code that are not protecting them. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ms. Zarrillo. Discussion on the motion. Mr. Fragascatos, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this too could be taken up in committee business. I want to keep listening to witnesses. I think the majority of colleagues feel the same way. With that, I move to adjourn debate on the motion.
So we have a motion to adjourn debate on the motion of Madame Zarrillo. Mr. Clerk, a recorded vote on the motion of adjournment on debate.
Mr. Fragascatos.
Yes.
Mr. Long.
Yes.
Mr. Collins.
Yes.
Mr. Coteau.
Yes.
Mr. Van Bynen.
Yes.
Ms. Gray.
Yes.
Ms. Falk.
Yes.
Mr. Seaback.
Yes.
Ms. Gladue.
Yes.
Madame Chabot.
No.
Ms. Zarrillo.
No.
The motion is carried, means debate is adjourned, and your time is up, Madame Zarrillo. We'll move to Madame Gladue for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here today. Just to start out, I think my colleague, Mr. Coteau, was caught in the past, so I wanted to bring him up to date, because 10 days ago, this is what the Conservative leader said. A common-sense Conservative government will not introduce or pass bills C-377, C-525, or right-to-work laws, period. This commitment will be written in my election platform. So that's good news. Certainly, I want to start with questioning Scott Archer. Let me brag a little bit about the trades in Sarnia-Lambton. There are 5,000 skilled trades that are the envy of North America and perhaps the world in terms of their quality, their productivity, and their safety performance. So, Mr. Archer, you outlined a few of the concerns that you have that are threats to, receiving ongoing powerful paychecks. Temporary foreign workers, some of the difficulty getting funding for apprenticeships. Are there other things that you think are threatening the health of union jobs in your area?
One of the things that I mentioned was the lack of a government initiative to help with existing plants and their emissions decreases. That's something that could definitely keep a lot of plants open in our area and keep a lot of jobs in our area and keep food on the table for folks. It's not just about expanding, it's about maintaining what you have. And some of these plants work together and serve specific functions to support other refineries. And it's a tough loss when one link in the chain goes. It can be sort of an exponential impact instead of linear. It can really have a ripple effect that's quite devastating.
You may be referring to the actions of the Minister Steve Guilbeault to shut down the INEOS facility instead of addressing emissions reduction technology that was available and could be put in place. Let's move on to the next question, which is part of compensation for good union jobs is benefits. And so the government is considering introducing what they call a universal single-payer pharmacare system. That would mean that everyone would lose the payment system that they have now. And so the union payment plans, I used to be on the local 663 one, and I know most plans cover 15,000 medications and other services, whereas the public plans tend to only cover 4,500. Would you be in favor of giving up those hard-fought union benefits if the government goes ahead with their plan?
I would definitely not be in favor of touching our benefits. We've worked hard for them.
Expect to hear similar answers from the Canadian Labour Congress. Would you be in favor of giving up your hard-won benefits for the federal government to manage your critical medications?
I've sat at many bargaining tables, and benefits are hard fought for. Nobody's prepared to give up benefits. However, it's critically important that we actually gain a national pharmacare plan, because unfortunately, the reality is that while 80% of unionized workers have supplemental health benefits, 56% of non-unionized workers have zero benefits. And so in order for us to take care of all workers in Canada, we need to make sure that we have some universal plans. Those plans can also augment the existing union negotiated plans, leaving some of the additional money that would be saved by those employers.
Thank you. The government's tending to replace your union plans, so I just wanted to get on the record that that wasn't a good idea. Let me talk again about the Stellantis facility and the other battery plants. There's been $55 billion of taxpayer money put in to create what turns out to be about 3,000 jobs for Canadians. So if you do the math on that, you should have just given people the money and they'd be never having to work again. What do you think should be done to ensure in the go forward that all government contracts protect Canadian jobs? We've heard comments from the Stelco workers about not including Chinese steel in the Canadian contracts like they do, but would you have any advice, Mr. Archer, for future contracts?
Yes, thank you. There definitely needs to be verbiage in future contracts that the work needs to be done by Canadian workers. The way that it's gone, as we've discussed on the Stellantis job, has been definitely less than optimal.
Thank you, Madame Gladue. Mr. Fragascatos for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to witnesses for appearing today. First of all, let's be crystal clear about what pharmacare is from the government's perspective. I have not read in the legislation in terms of what also the government has said on the matter publicly or privately in discussions that have happened within our caucus. There's been nothing about taking away benefits from anybody. That is not the view of the government. I could go back and talk about how conservative friends across the aisle wanted to move retirement or OAS eligibility from 65 to 67. That's on record. We know that was a fact. But, Mr. Chair, I do want to begin my questions with Ms. Brusk, if I could. Ms. Brusk, how critical are union dues for the functioning of unions and members?
It is absolutely critical that unions have the resources to properly represent their members. Things like negotiations, things like member education, things like providing those scholarships one of your colleagues spoke about. Those are all things that are funded by union dues. Union officials are democratically elected. Their members have the access to all financial information that is within their purview to review. There are financial committees that review how unions spend their money. It is critically important in order for unions to do the work that their members expect of them, and that we're obligated under provincial and federal legislation in terms of how we represent our members to actually have the resources to do the work that we need to do.
Thank you very much for that. What do you think, in light of what you said, I know where you're going to go with it, but I think it's still important for us to hear what your view is with respect to some U.S. states where so-called right-to-work laws are in place that would starve unions of membership dues?
We know that right to work means that right to work for less. Because the reality is that when you do not have the resources to file those grievances, to go to arbitration on a case, to properly negotiate, to get the member input, and to properly represent your members, you cannot fully do the job of a union. And so members having the ability to be free riders, to opt out of paying dues that are, quite frankly, income tax deductible, is a huge problem in terms of the ability for us to do our work and to properly build a middle class.
Thank you very much. Are you familiar with the Conservative Party's official policy document and what it says about right to work?
I am familiar with the party policy document. I am familiar that on page 6 and I think page 7, it indicates that the party stands for the opportunity for people to make the decision as to whether or not they want to contribute to their union.
And so I know Conservative colleagues are anxious to say that Mr. Poilievre has said that he would not pursue right-to-work legislation if his party formed government and he became Prime Minister. But if that was sincere, then that document, which was updated as recently as 2023, Mr. Chair, would have been changed. He would have ensured that their official policy document made clear that the Conservative Party of Canada does not believe in right-to-work laws. But it's quite the contrary, isn't it? Because as you said, Ms. Brusk, on page 6...
Point of order.
Point of order. Clearly state your point of order.
The member knows very clearly that the Conservative leader cannot alter a policy document.
Sorry, Mr. Seebeck.
It's not a point of order.
Conservative Party members.
Chair, I know it's a...
Just a moment. That is not a point of order, Mr. Seebeck. And you know, Ms. Gray, you have a point of order? Clearly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to remind the committee of the purpose of the study, which I will read, refers to the compensation disparities between unionized and non-unionized workers in Canada. And so to stay on topic between union wages and
thank you, Ms. Gray. Ms. Gray, that's a decision that I will make as chair, and I give quite a bit of latitude on all members when they have their time, and I ask all members to respect that. Mr. Fregiscatos.
It is a sensitive matter, as we've seen for Conservative colleagues, but Ms. Gray's point of order is actually, I'm thrilled she raised it, because the point about disparities is perfectly on point. Ms. Brusk, how do right-to-work laws impact pay ultimately? Because my understanding is if unions are starved of membership dues, they lack the resources, the financial resources to carry out, among other things, collective bargaining, which is so central to ensuring good pay for workers. Am I right in saying that? Is there an issue of disparity with respect to right-to-work laws? Is it relevant?
It's 100% relevant because the reality is that in the states that have right-to-work laws, the average wage of workers is considerably less than their unionized, fully functioning counterparts in areas of legislative areas that do not have right-to-work laws. And we can provide you with reams of data to support that argument.
Your time is up. And, Ms. Gray has the floor for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I have a couple of questions for Mr. Archer directly relating to the topic of the study here today. And you had advocated previously calling on for Line 5 pipeline, for that pipeline to remain in operation. And you called on the Prime Minister to reach out to the American government on behalf of, quote, citizens of Canada, skilled tradespeople, and the families who depend upon the oil and gas industry to provide their livelihood and sustain their quality of life, unquote. And in your opening statement today, you talked about a recent point in time where there were 300 of your members on an out-of-work list, right? And so my first question for you is, has the choices of the current Liberal government when it comes to the oil and gas industry, specifically whether it be killing pipelines like Energy East and Northern Gateway or restricting the ability to get oil and gas projects approved through unconstitutional red tape like Bill C-69, has that negatively impacted those tradespeople, those workers that you know and their families who rely on the oil and gas industry for their livelihoods? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gray. As you're well aware, the oil industry in this country is currently in quite a slump. I think honestly there needs to be some attention directed to reviving it instead of directing things towards electric vehicles and wind farms and things of that nature that have proven to be really just ineffective. I think the focus should be more on converting existing facilities to focus on hydrogen use and production. Honestly, that is a more realistic path forward for the future, and I think that would be money better spent, and it would preserve existing Canadian jobs and create some new ones as well.
Great, thank you for that. I wanted to ask as well, sort of on a similar topic. We know that the Minister of Natural Resources has a just transition plan, and from September 20 of 2022, it estimated that this plan would lead to an elimination of 2.7 million jobs in sectors like agriculture, energy, manufacturing, construction, and transportation. That's right in the government's own document. And I've heard a lot of uncertainty and how this is really incredibly stressful for workers. And so I'm wondering if what your thoughts on that are. And I'll ask you that first, what your thoughts on that are.
Well, it feels like we've had everything coming at us in the last few years with, as you mentioned, Line 5 and the oil and gas industry in general just seem to be taking hits over and over again. So it's pretty stressful for all of us in the industry. It's I know I lose a lot of sleep over it. My wife is seated in the gallery behind us here. You could probably get her opinion on how much sleep I lose. It's just something that I wish we could move forward with more productively. There's a lot of opportunity that I feel is not being exploited as it should, and this obviously is the greatest country in the world to live in, and we have so much to offer, and I would just like to kind of push some of our strengths more than I currently feel they are being.
Thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the personal aspect as well, because we know that these types of stresses are really, really hard on families. So thank you very much for sharing that. The other thing I wanted to ask you on this is governments will talk about reskilling workers, and is in particular with this Just Transition Plan. And this document talks about reskilling to other positions, such as a janitor as an example, which is an important job and a very respectable job, but may or may not be the same compensation, whether it's union wages or benefits. So I'm wondering if you have seen with some of these reskilling, when different positions have been lost and there's a reskilling of a position, is it always comparable with the same? You know, from what you might have seen, is it unionized? Is it the same pay? Is it the same benefits? Or are there concerns that really isn't what might be happening?
Her time has gone well over, so you may be able to answer that on another question. We'll now move to Mr. Van Bynen for 5 minutes.
I think I'll be splitting my time with my colleague, Mr. Chair.
Collectively 5 minutes.
My wife was born in Windsor, and she had to endure some of the very difficult times they had when the auto industry was failing. And her family is still there now. And they say that Windsor is alive and well and bustling as a result of these investments. So I think we need to put this into a proper perspective, that things are moving along well for Windsor as a result of the government's decision to support the auto industry and the shift in the auto industry. But that's not my question. We did a study here in this committee that talked about artificial intelligence and its impact on the workforce. And it had a number of significant recommendations. And with the emerging trends with artificial intelligence, with gig work and remote work, how do you feel that will impact unionization rates as well as compensation? And what do you see would be the role of the union going forward as the industry and technology has its impact on the industry? And that question is from Ms. Brusk.
Thank you for that important question. We certainly have seen significant changes in the workforce over the last number of years with AI, with gig work, with technological changes. The most critical thing for us as union workers is to make sure that we have a seat at the decision-making tables about our future. And that means that we need to be consulted in a meaningful way when it comes to these changes that we're experiencing in various different sectors. And so I was very heartened to see the Sustainable Jobs Act recently passed. That actually gives workers a seat at the decision-making tables as we deal with some of the challenges of getting to net zero and moving jobs into a clean economy type of situation. But more specifically with regards to gig and AI, we need to look at some legislative priorities in terms of how we manage those particular issues. The definition of what a worker is no longer really fits with the new gig economy that we have. Is that worker in fact employed, or is that worker a freelance person? We haven't caught up in our provincial, territorial, and our federal government in terms of how we actually define workers and what rights and privileges and benefits they actually have under existing legislation. So that has to be a very high priority for us to ensure that those workers also have a powerful paycheck.
Thank you. Mr. Collins.
Very quickly, Mr. Chair, my question is for Ms. Brusk. Sometimes, or she referenced in her opening statement, the fight sometimes with big corporations in terms of securing benefits for workers. Sometimes those fights, though, are with governments. And I referenced in our last committee the fight that unions had with former Premier Mike Harris and his common sense revolution and the days of actions that led to thousands of employees taking to the streets. Legislation from Prime Minister Harper was referenced today in terms of targeting unionized workers. And then, of course, I can point to Bill 124 and Premier Ford completely undermining the collective bargaining process and trying to cap wages outside of that process and really violating the rights of not just union members but the people that represent them at the bargaining table. So quick question to you, Ms. Brusk, in terms of, when we look at wage disparity between union and non-union workers, sometimes Conservative governments have it in them to pick a fight with unionized workers. Can you advise the committee in terms of, how we deal with those instances in terms of trying to correct some of the damages that's been done to that process over the years, and how we can support as a government workers with just supporting the basic rights that they have in terms of what they bring to the bargaining table?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, first and foremost, the issue is listen to what union workers have to say. When you looked at Bill 124 in Ontario and you saw the lowest paid education workers being told that they had to accept a collective agreement that was well subpar in terms of wages and benefits. And then the threat of using the notwithstanding clause in our Constitution to prevent those workers from going on strike for a fair deal was absolutely egregious. So it's the overreach when it comes to fair collective bargaining that is most at stake when we deal with these kinds of situations. And so we need to actually ensure that all employers understand, whether it's public or private sector, that when you get to the bargaining table, you need to actually put in the fair day's work of actually getting to a fair and reasonable deal based on what the economics currently provide. And too many times we see interference in that particular process, and that is the problem.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Chabot pour 2 minutes et 30.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais essayer de poser une question qui relève de nous ici, parce qu'on se rappelle que les lois du travail sont...
I'm going to try and ask a question related to us here, because we know that the rules of are provincial, but what we're talking about here concerns our jurisdiction. So what's done in provinces, be they Conservative or other, well, maybe that shouldn't be our concern. I have a question on an obstacle to freedom of bargaining. I don't know if it is. It's a question for you, Ms. Brusk. There's an article in the Canadian Labour Code which can have an executory arbitration to end conflict. Is that an obstacle to the right to bargain? How is that received at the CLC, that analysis?
to have an arbitrated or an imposed collective agreement on parties. We think that when there is already an out that the employer can point to, their commitment to actually reaching a deal at the bargaining table is not 100%. And so we saw that in the most recent strike, or almost very limited strike at the railways, where the employer coming in advocated for an arbitrated solution to that particular round of bargaining. When in November, the employer comes to the table in a federally regulated area and says, we want to have binding arbitration resolve this issue for us, we have to question how much time, energy, and effort they're actually putting in at the bargaining table to reach that collective agreement by having good conversation about the issues that really matter. And it's not only wages and benefits, it's safety for workers, it's safety for our communities that are at stake. And so we need to be mindful of those legislative components and what they actually mean.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Mr. Jensen, do you have an opinion on this issue of binding arbitration that can be imposed in collective bargaining?
I believe that the workers and the companies should be able to negotiate a fair agreement at the bargaining table. That's where it should happen. The threat of using expedited arbitration prevents the company from actually bargaining in good faith.
Madame Chabot. Madame Zarrillo for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to start by congratulating ATU Local 1724, President Joe McCann, and all of your members today on ratifying a contract with Transdev and HandyDART. I know this was a long-fought battle for them, and they secured increased wages, but also a reduction in use of taxis, which this committee would be interested in, as this services people with disabilities who were more and more being subjected to transportation that did not suit their needs. So I wanted to congratulate all of the HandyDART workers, and thank you again to the president of Local 1724. My comments, I want to thank Member Wayne Long for allowing us to shine a light on the corporate practices that are driving down wages and the new generation of worker exploitation that actually necessitated unions in the first place. So I was going to ask witness Dan Jansen if you could share some workplace practices that you are seeing that are eroding the rights of workers that Parliament should be addressing with legislation. And if we have time, I would also like to ask that question to witness B. Brusk.
Well, I think contract flipping 100% in the airline industry is something that is eroding workers' rights. Although it's come a long way, I do believe that there's much more that can be done to protect workers that are going through this process.
Thank you, and then thank you so much. And I would just ask witness B. Brusk as well.
So outside of contract flipping, the issue of casual labor versus permanent positions is becoming more and more widespread. So rather than hiring a permanent position, there are term positions that keep getting extended over and over and over again. And just before that worker might be eligible for an increase in wages and some benefits, that's when their term suddenly ends, only to be renewed maybe the next month down the road because they actually do still need that position. The other piece is that we spoke about earlier is the issue of gig work. When you have an employee employed as a gig worker, not technically an employee in many instances, those workers don't have the same rights and benefits. They don't have the same workplace safety and health protections. They don't have the same ability to garner things like vacation pay, to garner things like severance pay, to have the protections that other employees actually have under various different legislative mechanisms. And so from a federal and provincial and territorial basis, these are issues that we need to be turning our minds to, because these are issues where workers are struggling to make ends meet because they are not technically permanent workers. And so even organizing those kinds of workers is more and more difficult.
Thank you, Madame Zarrillo. Mr. Seebeck for 5 minutes.
Great. Mr. Jansen, what will happen if the contract for the union, for the workers you represent, is flipped and goes to a non-union company? What will happen to the employees that you represent?
Well, I very much hope that that new employer, non-union employer, if it does go that way, will respect the Canada Labour Code and the equal remuneration and retendering laws, successorship laws. However, it's not guaranteed.
What happens?
And if they don't, those workers or us as a union will have to fight to help either organize those workers so that we can protect them under a contract, or those workers themselves will have to approach the labor program to complain that their worker has not complied with the Canada Labour Code.
Okay, and so there's an opportunity, as I said earlier, under Section 47.3, the Minister of Labour could expand Section 47.3 to cover just this circumstance. Would you urge the current government to have the Minister of Labour do that so your workers don't risk lower pay, etc., if the contract flips?
The government to do whatever it takes to help this group of workers. As I said, Bill C-330 is there if there's an avenue to get that passed through the House. If there's an avenue for the minister to step in and protect these workers. Anything would help right now. 28 days notice, they still don't know what's happening. These workers need some help.
And Ms. Brusk, I want to ask you a question. The government just recently did a Section 107 referral to end the rail strike, and the Supreme Court actually found in 2015 that the right to strike is constitutionally protected under Section 2D of the Charter. Would you agree that by sending this union to arbitration through a ministerial order and removing the right to strike, the government violated the constitutional rights of those unions?
Well, that union certainly is taking legal action, asserting exactly what you've just identified. And we strongly believe, as I indicated earlier, that in this particular case, this employer advocated for an arbitrated settlement on day one of negotiations. And that is troublesome to us. We want employers to come to the bargaining table to be respectful of the process and to fully engage in the process of getting a fair deal.
Mr. Archer, I actually look at data on unionization rates. Unionization rates in forestry, oil and gas, and mining have really gone down in the last little while. You talked about some of the challenges with the environment right now. Would you say that some of the government decisions with respect to oil and gas and mining is leading to union job losses in those sectors?
Well, I mean, you could definitely interpret stats that way. I think that, as I mentioned earlier, just based on our safety record, in my jurisdiction, we have a 98% union market share, and that is a huge part of why our safety record is absolutely impeccable. Due to our higher level of training, our higher level of skill, and everyone being completely invested. I think that alone is worth a look for union labor. Everyone gets home safe at the end of the day, and you get a superior product. I think that's an awfully strong selling point.
I think I'm good. Thanks.
Back, Mr. Long for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you to our witnesses. This is a long session for you. Ms. Brusk, witness Waibu, I just want to get your opinions on the decline on union membership. Stats Canada came out with a report in 2022 that says basically over 40 years, I think it was from 2022 to 1981, union membership declined from 37.6% to 28.7%. So we'll start with you, Ms. Brusk, first. Can you just comment on what might have contributed to that decline in union membership, and how has that decline in membership correlated with trends in earnings? Thank you.
We can certainly see that in many instances, larger workplaces that used to be unionized are not as large as they used to be, for one instance, and they're not as concentrated as they used to be. So when you would have a plant with 400, 500, 600 people working in one area, organizing one plant with a concentrated mass of employees is relatively simple as compared to the kind of unionization that we have now that we're trying to organize at various different places at the same time when workers are spread out and there is not necessarily the same commonality of interest in terms of geographic location. That is one particular challenge. I spoke earlier today as well about the various different labor legislation and how that impacts unionization rates, trying to organize having a multi-tiered process to actually getting unionized, getting recognition and having bargaining rights is much more complicated than it has been in the past. And that is egregious, and that's something that we work with our provincial and territorial partners on. The decision to make application to a union is not an easy decision. It's a kitchen table conversation that you have with your family because there is a lot that goes into that kind of a decision. If my employer finds out that I'm trying to get unionized, am I going to lose my job before I can actually have union protection? Those are very real concerns that workers have. And lastly, I would say there's a changing demographic. Workers aren't staying at their places of employment for very long. It's very common to have workers working 2 or 3 different jobs at one time. The commitment to staying with one employer isn't as great because they don't see a future with that particular employer in terms of actually building up into a middle-class job.
Thank you for that. Witness Weibo, do you have anything you want to add to that, what you've seen?
Yeah, I will add and emphasize what Witness Brusk has said here. One thing in particular that I've found in my own experience too is in the evolving work landscape, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, we do see people living in various areas, doing remote work. Trying to organize within the virtual setting is quite difficult because people are becoming increasingly siloed. I think some of that siloing is happening through cultural and societal shifts in general, which is making workers feel much more disconnected, and the hostility of retaliation and the consequences of retaliation only get higher in the face of a housing crisis, in the face of collapsing healthcare and lower resources within your community. If you're looking at needing to cover leases, mortgages, children, whatever it might be, that fear of retaliation is really high, and the need for worker solidarity is nth-fold beyond it. And if the more that we are siloed and the more that we worried about that, the harder it is to have those kitchen table conversations where people do feel supported and have the capacity to go ahead with a card check.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Mr. Long, and thank you, Mr. Weibo, for your good testimony to committee. So that concludes the questioning round with the witness, but you can leave at your will. We've got a couple of, I need clarification on 2 items, direction from committee members. Does the committee wish to accept a brief submitted by Starlight Investments? This was a witness that was, I'll say, controversial. The request was to provide a written brief. The written brief, and I'll ask the analyst speak, came in after the deadline that the committee had instilled. So I'll ask the witness just to speak the analyst to speak briefly too.
Just for clarification, the brief from Starlight was received after the deadline that the committee had set to receive briefs as part of the investments in housing study, approximately a month after the fact. So just seeking clarification from the committee if they would like to include that brief as part of the evidence for the report.
Ms. Cirillo?
Thank you, Chair. And I know that you know that I feel strongly about the fact that this witness was allowed to get away with twice refusing to appear before this committee. And I also know that the Liberals and the Conservatives teamed up to give this person a free pass and opened the opportunity for them to send a brief. I think that we've seen on CBC, they've been covering the business practices of Starlight Investment. We've certainly seen the displacement of tenants, the exploitation of tenants. We're now in a situation where tenants are having to unionize against their landlords. So I think if the Starlight CEO has something to say, we certainly would like to hear from them in this committee in a forum where we can ask them questions. The equity is at question here. I think that there's a class war going on right now between landlords and their tenants, and certainly I understand why the Liberals and the Conservatives would team up to try to protect these corporate landlords. I will not, as the NDPer. So no, I will not submit. I will not accept a submission written of someone who refused to attend this parliamentary committee twice, right in the face of Canadians that are right now living in cars because of the practices of this type of landlord. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cirillo. Madame Chabot?
Je suis David Porosa.
I'm of the opinion to not receive it, especially after being late for 1 month. They should have be more considerate about our work. I think that a few days is acceptable, but I don't think that this is not. I think we need to have a rule, and I won't add any more.
On the 21st, and the brief was submitted on June 29th with 7 days. I'm directed by the unanimous or the majority of the committee. I've heard 2 speak against accepting it, so I'm taking everybody else is agreeable to accepting the brief. Okay. Based on that, the majority of the committee chooses to accept the brief to be included in the report. Ms. Cirillo?
Like a recorded vote, please.
Okay, no problem. I would need somebody to move a motion to accept the brief.
It's not a big deal. We don't need to vote.
Accept the brief.
Okay, then that we have a motion. Yeah, this is too late. Committee members, thank you. I haven't arrived at a consent. I haven't arrived at a decision on this. I will revisit it. Thank you. With that, we have reached the exclusion of the committee's time. Committee is adjourned.